Step into my life stream, welcome to the show. I'm crispy the catfish and high value glow. I preach level up and girls get paid, but behind the scenes I'm crying in the shade. I drag exoticals to pretty girls online, say they're overrated, overhyped and declined, but the truth of it all, the secret I hide. I wish I had to face their waste, their light skin pride. I call it colorism, screaming day and night, but envy hits different when the girl is your fight. I'm preaching from a throne built out of spite, a queen of the dark, but not in the way I like. Cause I'm crispy, the colorism catfish, prophet of the past, over granting no wish, leader of the lonely with a bitter big background, teaching hypergamy while I'm breaking down. I want exotical baby, the rich white king, but white men scroll past me like I'm not a thing. Can't birth the aesthetic I envy the most, so I haunt the internet like a jealous ghost. I tell girls, sis, get you a high value man, but the men that I want got me blocked on the gram. I dream of blonde babies, blue eyes so sweet, but rich white dudes won't even meet. I fantasize daily about marrying up, but I'm DoorDash broke with an empty cup. I roast pretty women cause I can't compete, so I built an empire from my personal defeat. I say it's society, I say it's their shade, but truth is I'm mad I can't change my fate. It's not just my shade, it's my size, my mess. I'm preaching from a life I don't ever possess. Yeah, I'm crispy, the colorism catfish, prophet of the past. Over talk they dismiss, leader of the lonely in a world so cold, selling fantasies I can't even hold. I want exotical babies with a rich white king, but those men ain't checking for a dark white queen. I post high value dreams, but my truth is raw. I'm the mentor of the miserable, broken with a flaw. They call me bitter, but bitterness is just grief in stilettos. Pretty girls walk in light, I walk in comments. High value men walk past me like I'm invisible air. So I built a platform, a sisterhood of the overlooked, a congregation of the unwanted. I'm not just crispy, I'm the prophet of the past over. I'm crispy, the colorism catfish, jealous of the beauty that I always dismiss, leader of the lonely, my kingdom of pain, preaching hypergamy I'll never attain. I want exotical kids with a rich white man, but I'm shadow banned from every dating app plan, so I log back online. I'm queen of the lost, a big bag boss, forever at a cost. Forever at a cost.
Black girl, white guy, black girl, white guy, black girl, white guy, yeah. Black girl, white guy, black girl, white guy, black girl, white guy, yeah. Let's go. Black girl, white guy, swirling like a milkshake, cookies on the side, yeah, yeah. Black girl, white guy, swirling like a milkshake, cookies on the side, yeah, yeah. Black girl, white guy, swirling like a milkshake, cookies on the side, yeah, yeah. Black girl, white guy, swirling like a milkshake, cookies on the side. Let me paint a picture for you. Heard he got that good, got that intermission for you. Ain't about his mama business, always getting in it for you. And he got a soft spot, won't be like that with his daughter. He don't like him but the bear, baby want a custom order. Met him at the Five Guys, seen him eating fries. I was in my car, he seen my knees, I seen his eyes. Then we had a couple drinks, we was vibing, then we went inside. And I told him I was finna cut him off, but then I lied. Cause he see me and he know I'm outside. He wanna get in and wanna go for a ride. When he finish, need a bowl of rice on the side. He got the tools, know I keep him in the toolbox. White boy turned into a poodle, call him Rufus. With the crew neck, and he know I'm too fly. Had to show him what it do, we gon' see what it's gon' do. God. Black girl, white guy, black girl, white guy, black girl, white guy, yeah, yeah. Black girl, white guy, black girl, white guy, black girl, white guy, yeah, yeah. Black girl, white guy, swirling like a milkshake, cookies on the side, yeah, yeah. Black girl, white guy, swirling like a milkshake, cookies on the side. She like her men like she like her juice. The tropic baby from there with the cotton. Said we go juice. The topic that we cockle. When them when no mean you snotty bubble. When no be gaudy bubble. Black girl, white guy, 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 black girl, white guy.
Let's go.
Black girl, white guy, swirling like a milkshake, cookies on the side. Black girl, white guy, swirling like a milkshake, cookies on the side. Black girl, white guy, swirling like a milkshake, cookies on the side. Black girl, white guy, swirling like a milkshake, cookies on the side. Let me paint the picture for you. Heard he got that good, got that intermission for you. Ain't about his mama business, always getting in it for you. And he got a soft spot, won't be like that with his daughter. He don't like him Build-A-Bear, baby want a custom order. Met him at the Five Guys, seen him eating fries. I was in my car, he seen my knees, I seen his eyes. Then we had a couple drinks, we was vibing and went inside. And I told him I was finna cut him off, but then I lied. Cause he see me and he know I'm outside. He wanna get in it, wanna go for a ride. When he finish, need a bowl of rice on the side. He got the tools, know I keep him in the toolbox. White boy turn into a poodle, call him Rufus. With the crew neck and he know I'm too fly. Had to show him what it do, we gon' see what it's gon' do. Guy, black girl, white 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 guy. Black girl, white guy, swirling like a milkshake, cookies on the side. Black girl, white guy, swirling like a milkshake, cookies on the side. Go, black girl, white guy, swirling like a milkshake, cookies on the side. Go. Black girl, white guy, swirling like a milkshake, cookies on the side. Go. She like a man, like she like a juice, it's tropic. Go. Baby from me,
What's going on, everybody? What is going on? Happy Thursday. Happy Thursday. Shout out to all of you guys. I got my lip gloss over here. Shout out to all you guys who are joining me on CP time. I meant to get to this a little bit earlier, but I just had a lot of information I was compiling and just today got away from me. So anyways, shout out to you replay gang. I already know some of y'all gonna catch me up on the replay. Shout out to those of you guys who are here live. Like, share, subscribe on the way in. Y'all know the drill. And today we're going to go over a lot of information. I wanted to do a follow-up of the video that I posted earlier this week. That post was actually a replay. It was a snippet from a larger live I did, I think about 2.5-3 years ago. And I had been meaning to follow up from that particular live stream because I thought there was a lot more pertinent information that I wanted to put out there that I just think we need to know in order to navigate a lot of the propaganda going on today. So so again, like, share, subscribe. We're going to go over a lot of information today. If I get enough support once I'm done going over the information, I will open up the call lines for anybody who has questions or just any things that they want to add. Okay, so bear with me real quick. I'm going to do this thing real quickly, and then we're going to go right into the presentation because we're going to have a little bit of a history lesson today, guys. We're going to go over a little bit of history, but again, I think this is really, really important in light of what we're seeing today, just in media, what we're seeing in pop culture, and I think a lot of the messages that are going around today, I think are just, they're ahistorical, or I think there's just a lot of missing pieces. People don't understand their history. Black Americans sometimes don't understand their history. Sometimes Black folks, period, are just given a lot of misinformation. So I'm hoping to kind of clear up some of that today and then give you guys context and just backdrop. So now when you guys are running into a lot of this propaganda or a lot of these misandrous messages, sometimes even this misogynist messages as it relates to Black women, Black men, you guys know where they're coming from, and then you know how to navigate. So anyways, let me put this up real quick, and then we're going to go right into the presentation. So bear with me. I just want to set my goal. I like setting goals once I've learned how to do that. So again, guys, like, share, subscribe. Thank you guys so much for bearing with me on CP time. I didn't mean it, but sometimes just things happen. Why is this? Sorry, guys. I'm having some technical issues here. Okay, I want to start my goal. start my goal. Okay. All right. So today we're talking a little bit about, I call it climbing Scroll Summit or climbing Mount Summit. And really what we're going to be looking at is where do these ideas of swirling, divesting, corrective promotion, which some of the ladies like to use, where do these ideas come from? And what's often told, I think, and is actually what's misunderstood, is ladies think that this is some new phenomenon that really only transpired over the last, 15, 20 years since the advent of social media. But in fact, these ideas around swirling, around divesting, around corrective promotion, these ideas around, Black women needing to level up their life, Black women needing to expand their options to non-white or just to non-Black men in order to improve their social status, to improve their monetary status, to improve their life. These are actually century-long traditions that have been practiced in Black culture for quite some time. And that's what I think is one of the most detrimental and one of the most largest misconceptions around these concepts. There's a new framing and there's new terminology to practices that have been going on literally for centuries. So that's what we're going to break down a little bit down today. And then I want to talk specifically about what have been the implications of these political movements. Okay, so I'm going to pull up this document real quick. Again, guys, like, share, subscribe. If you haven't already, get your shirt if it's not Jermaine's fault. I'm rocking mine today. Grab your shirt, grab your, this is also available in a hoodie. I have it available in a gray hoodie. I think one of you guys asked. I do have this available in like a gray hoodie. Also, I think it's black, there's multiple colors. So you can get this in your size, in your color. You can get it in a t-shirt. You can get it in, hoodie. And then, like I said, I also have a different design of this. It's not Jermaine's fault, where it's just literally, it doesn't have this picture. It literally just has the words. And I also have a cap for those of you guys who are interested. Okay. Shameless plug. This was my workout. This was my walk shirt, and this is about to be my workout shirt today. After this, I'm going to work out, you guys. You can hold me to it. Yes. So grab your copy. And now I want to let's go right into the presentation. This was what was taking me a little longer than I anticipated. I had a lot of information I just wanted to compile. And instead of me throwing it together, I was like, let me present this information in a way that is going to be succinct. So if I can pull it up. If it lets me do it now. Sorry, guys. Bear with me. It's not that one. Let me see. Where'd it go? Oops. Sorry. I need to put this thing on do not disturb. Why is it acting? Sorry, guys. Now it's acting weird. I got this to work right before I went live. This is what happens. Struggle streaming, because you get things to work right before you go live, and then as soon as you go live, things want to act all funny style. So bear with me, folks. I'm just trying to bring up the presentation so I can actually share with you guys what I put together. If it wants to come up. Or did I close it? Is that what happened? Struggle streaming already. Okay. Hey, what's going on? Good to see you. Good to see you. Like, share, subscribe on the way in. Y'all know the drill. I'm trying to bring up my screen. It's just, okay, there it is. Sorry, it was my thing was tripping. Okay. So today we're talking a little bit about climbing Mount Swirl, right? And as I mentioned before, first of all, I want to make this clear that the purpose of today's presentation is not in any way, shape, or form to bash or shame those who are in interracial relationships. I've said for quite some time that I personally don't see anything wrong with two grown adults of different ethnic backgrounds, of different races, falling in love. I have no issue with that. And I imagine most people don't, generally speaking. If you're just loving somebody else, you guys happen to fall in love. Many of you guys who follow me, or not gonna say many, but I know some of you guys who follow me are either married to somebody of a different race, you're dating, you're in a intimate relationship with somebody of a different race. So this is in no way, shape, or form meant to bash people who are in interracial relationships that are healthy, that are thriving, that are fulfilling. I do, however, want to provide historical context to just, again, where a lot of these ideas are coming from that are propaganda and the way in which interracial relationships have been propagandized to promote ideas that I believe are actually very detrimental to the Black community. Sometimes are very misandrist, and sometimes can also be misogynist as well. So that is what I want to tease out specifically today. Okay. Yeah, you said it happens, struggle streaming. Again, guys, like, share, subscribe. Okay, so today we're gonna go, it's gonna be a little bit of the history lesson, as I mentioned before. I'm gonna get through this, and if I get enough support, then I will be happy to open up the call lines for anybody who has questions, has concerns, or just has anything that they would like to add. But today's gonna be a bit of a history lesson, so bear with me. So today we want to talk again a little bit about, I call it climbing Swirl Summit, or climbing Mount Swirl, okay? And basically what I'm wanting to explain is that these ideas that we see, these ideas that have been promoted, these are actually century-long traditions that have been going on for quite some time. So when people tell you, or when some of the lovely ladies tell you that Black women are just now opening up their options, that they have been undyingly loyal to Black men for hundreds of years, for centuries, and that it's just really now the last 15, 20, 30 years that they are now expanding their options because loyalty to Black men has done nothing but harm to them. That's actually not true. That's actually not true at all. I want to make sure, can you guys see the presentation? Or you guys just see, it looks like you guys are just seeing me. Okay, can you guys see the presentation now? I just want to make sure. Because I think you guys are just seeing me. I was trying to show you guys a presentation. So anyways, when they tell you that, I want you to know that they're not telling you the truth. It's not true. And this is what we're going to explain is not only the different examples of swirling that have been happening now since, gosh, for hundreds of years, but what the actual political implications of that were for the women who participated in it, for the men who participated, and then ultimately for the Black community. That's what we're going to be doing today. Okay, so we're going to go a little bit down history lane. So just to be clear, swirling and divesting started as an African enterprise among certain West African cultures that dates back to the transatlantic slave trade. So I know there's this idea right now that, like, anytime you see a swirler, or anytime you see a Black woman who's going online and just basically speaking a whole bunch of propaganda connected to interracial relationships, that she's always African. People like to use the word tether, quote, tether, unquote, and that she's not Black American. And there's truth and there's untruth to that. There is truth in that the earliest examples of what we would consider swirling, divesting, corrective promotion can be found on the African continent. That is absolutely true. What's untrue is that these ideas, these practices, these beliefs never translated over to the Americas. That's what's untrue. And we're going to unpack that, a little bit later on. But I do want it to be clear that the earliest examples of, quote, swirling and divesting, or specifically using interracial marriage as a enterprise for a Black woman to improve their economic standing, is something that dates back to the transatlantic slave trade, right? So, and there were different names for this. Basically, it was where European settlers entered into marriage with West African women to help them gain access to the African coast and its resources. So basically what happened is these European settlers, they would come over to the African coast. And oftentimes these Europeans, they didn't understand the culture, they could not handle the climate, they would get sick, they ultimately did not know how to navigate those tropical terrains because it was not common to them. So what would happen is they would enter into these marriages with some of the different local women, and those local women would actually help navigate them or integrate them into the culture. So it says, intermarriage with local Africans provided these European men safety from climate fever. Again, this was a common sickness that a lot of European men would experience when they would try to go over to Africa into an area they were not familiar with. They would get climate fever. One of the popular forts today in Ghana was famously called the white man's grave because at one point, I think they had like a 50% survival rate. When a European settler would go over there, about half of them would actually end up being unalived because of just the harsh conditions. And so when these European men, when they were able to secure an African wife, a lot of these African women understanding the climate, understanding the foods, understanding traditional medicine, understanding how to navigate the terrain, understanding the culture, they were able to help these European men navigate by keeping them healthy, giving them access to healthy food, to medicine, to water. And they ultimately started to serve as like a guidance and a culture broker, which would help them secure, would ultimately help them secure alliances, political alliances locally. Okay. So again, European men, what first happened, we see the earliest examples of swirling is when European men, they came over to the African coast. And right now we're focusing primarily in Ghana among the Akan people, but they would come over to the African coast. They would intermarry, and through the intermarriage, they gained access to internal African networks, thereby securing their trade and offering political protection. So, as I mentioned before, these European men, as they got these African women were able to not only keep them safe and healthy from harm, they were able to give them access into the intimate areas of society. And so this ended up being really a huge benefit for the European settlers who otherwise would not have been able to dominate or would not have been able to really gain much access to the African coast at all, because again, most of them could not even survive. These European men could not survive without the help of the local Africans at that time. And so, for the Ga and the Akan societies of Ghana, intermarriage between local men and European settlers, it was viewed as a positive diplomatic and commercial alliance that benefited both parties, okay? So again, swirling at this time was seen as a enterprise. It was seen as like a political enterprise, and it was used as an alliance between the local African women, oftentimes the local African kings, and the Europeans. And again, the benefit became diplomatic, it became commercial and economic, giving Europeans access to, local African resources, to African bodies, and then oftentimes giving, those who engage with the Africans who engage in it, whether it be the kings, the leaders at that time, their daughters, it gave them access to the European trade and also to economic resources. So at the beginning, it became it was supposedly a profitable marriage that produced a lot of wealth for those who were actually involved. So here is just like a chart. It gives you an example of what this looks like. And it talks a little bit about gender division. And the reason this is important is because when we understand the roles of women or wives in African society, the roles were a lot different than wives in the European society. In African societies, women still had more independence. Oftentimes they were the ones who engaged in independent trade. They are the ones who engaged in businesses. There was a clear division of labor. But women had a level of agency and independence, or African women had a level of agency and independence that you did not see among European women. With that said, so when we look at the divisions, when we look at what African women were able to provide the European husbands, so provision, right? The African women oftentimes are able to provide local food for them. And then through that, European men can give them trade goods and can give them actually monetary resources. There were trade and logistics. And so again, the African women were able to act as translators. They were diplomats, so they could speak between the two. They can negotiate between the two, between the European settlers and between the Africans who were trying to engage in some form of contracts. So they became like culture, brokers. And then again, the European husbands became the ones who were managing the fort's inventory of slaves and gold. So again, you're remembering at this time, they're engaging now the business at that time, the economy at the time, the booming business at that time was African bodies. It was slavery. So they're doing these diplomatic relationships, these diplomatic trades, including gold, including slaves, and other natural resources. Obviously, healthcare. The African women oftentimes had a good understanding of herbal medicine and nursing, and they essentially knew how to care for some of the sicknesses that were going on in that different climate. And so basically, it was her role to ensure that her European husband was able to survive, because oftentimes they were not accustomed to that climate. And then also social integration. Many of the women who did intermarry with European men at that time, they still maintained ties to their society. And so again, through that sense, they acted as a culture broker, and they helped the Europeans become integrated, or at least gain a foothold into the society, while also still maintaining their familial ties, right? And so this is, again, what this relationship oftentimes looked like. it started off, or it started off supposedly, it was supposed to start off supposedly as something that was mutually beneficial between the Africans who engaged in it and then the Europeans who engaged with it. So again, what I'm saying is like, this was what we would consider swirling, divesting, even corrective promotion. These are ideas, these are concepts that we can see really at the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade. That's what I'm ultimately trying to say. And it was specifically particular leaders. It wasn't like the entire African continent. It was very specific societies, generally on the coast. And they would oftentimes offer up their daughters, because think about it, if you're a king, let's say you're a king, you have 50 wives, you have 120 children, you can offer up a daughter or two or three to a European settler. He gives you access to money, he gives you access to gold, he gives you access to things from your culture. You're seeing it as a way to expand your international market. And so that's how a lot of the Nga societies, they looked at it. And you have to remember, a lot of these enslaved, they were prisoners of war. Sometimes they were people who they considered practicing witchcraft. They were people that they either were directly at odds with from, local battling tribes, or just people in society that they did not really value. At least that's how it started off. So again, through these marriages, African women remained connected to their families and villages, but they also had access to the forts where their European husbands conducted business and slave trade. So as I'm saying before, what these women started to do is African women, they started to integrate onto both sides. They still had their connections to their local families. They still had connections to, where they came from, but they also now were going into the forts, oftentimes, which is where their husbands lived. And so that's kind of, they were going back and forth essentially. Again, guys, for those of you here, like, share, subscribe. We are going a little bit over the history. For those of you guys who are just joining, we're going over the history of swirling, divesting. And what we've discovered so far is that this tradition of swirling, divesting, corrective promotion, a lot of these terms that ladies use today as if they are new concepts, actually dates back to the transatlantic slave trade. And so I'm explaining to you how this began, right? So we talked about how it began with European settlers coming over, intermarrying with certain African wives. Oftentimes, these are the daughters of rulers. Oftentimes, these are the daughters of leaders in the society. They intermarried with them. They entered into trade contracts as a way to try to basically exchange goods. That's how it happened, right? And then over time, we start to see how these African women who were in these interracial marriages, they became mediators for what would be the transatlantic slave trade. Okay, so now fast forward, we see, yes, this was political diplomat, as you're saying, yes, unity is strength. I see, yes, exactly, that's exactly right. Oh, so here it says, these marriages offered African women a real level up. And I like to use the term level up, right? Because when we think about the terms that these ladies use, when we think about how common, right? When we think about how common and how often interracial marriage, and specifically Black women marrying white men, is seen as some form of a level up. It's seen as some form of a social benefit, of a social strategy. It's seen as a way for her to improve your life. I want you to remember where these ideas are coming from. The earliest examples of swirling, divesting, were actually that. Corrective promotion, as it's used today, was literally a state sanctioned enterprise at its earliest inception. It was something that particular African societies promoted in order to basically expand their international trade. So again, I'm reminding this to you because now when you start to use these ladies, you take these concepts and then ultimately use it as a way to try to blame Black men for not being good enough. I want you to understand that, one, they're lying. Two, all they're doing is practicing an age-old tradition that is yet to be called out. Okay, so again, guys, for those of you who are there, like, share, subscribe. You can show support on obviously Cash App, Venmo, Shay Sade if you find this information important. And we are talking about the history of swirling, divesting, and corrective promotion. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, just wanted to, okay, so These marriages offered African women a real level up, again, by giving them and their children direct access to wealth coming from the thriving African slave trade. So, first of all, it wasn't like these Black women were marrying these European men and remained broke. No, oftentimes these marriages, it created a lot of wealth for the women who were actually able to do it. And, it was not uncommon. It was not uncommon for women to enter into these marriages with the European men and then the European men to leave and never return. That happened. That was not uncommon. But even in an instance where, a woman would enter through marriage, which was ultimately was like a political, it was like a political alliance. Even in the instances where that happened and they had children, even when he would leave, she still at that point will have been able to amass enough wealth. And so for the African women who were engaged in it, it oftentimes did lead to their financial benefit, which is why it was something that was so desirable to them. Now, this government-sanctioned corrective promotion, as I said before, this eventually created a separate class of what I'll call exoticals, because, again, that term that ladies like to use now, these term exoticals, which refers to lighter-skinned women, which not all light-skinned women are mixed, but nevertheless, lighter-skinned women, or in this case, mixed women. It basically created a separate class of exotical EuroAfricans, and over time, there were so many EuroAfricans that they basically became their own separate class. And in 1722, a fourth school was established in Ghana to educate them on Danish culture in the Ga Akan region. So again, this is like the fort in the coastal region of Ghana. And this is when the Danish, they had entered into a trade agreement with Ghana, and so they eventually they created a fort, and on that fort they started educating the EuroAfricans. And there are different names for this. And the reason there are different names for this is because this model, it didn't just happen in Ghana. We're focusing on Ghana and the Ga Akan region, but this happened across a few coastal societies. And there were names for these people. Some of them were like, I think, mulatresses, I think, like the term that changed depending upon the culture, depending upon the language. They were also known as Signatis, I think, with the Senegalese and the French. But basically, these like EuroAfricans, these mixed-raced men and women, they eventually became a separate class. And that was important because the EuroAfrican children were given a very distinctive status from local Africans through their European education, which was supported by the mulatto trust. And basically, the mulatto trust, this was a fund that the Danish government came up with through basically taxing, different things. And that mulatto chest was what was used to take care of this class, of this mixed class, of this EuroAfrican class. And that mulatto chest also afforded them education, room, boarding, things like that. Now, what's important to note is that oftentimes these EuroAfricans, particularly the women, they became the ideal marriage partner for European settlers, for Danish men or just European men in general who were coming over to the African coast, desiring to gain access into an expanding trade, desiring to basically build their business portfolio. These EuroAfrican, these mixed race women became the ideal partner for these men. Oftentimes, one, because they were seen as being loyal to European interest. So because these mixed race children received Danish or I focus on Danish in this particular presentation, but in general, like I said, this model was repeated across different nations. Because these mixed race children received European education, they were seen as being more loyal to the European interest, but they still possessed the local knowledge that oftentimes came from their mothers. Because remember, yes, these children, they may grow up on the fort or they may live a lot of the time on the European forts, but they still had mothers who were African who were very much connected to their family. And so they would go back to their families and their villages and their towns and their areas. They understood the culture, they understood the terrain. And so they gained an intimate understanding of both sides. And that was something that the Europeans really desired because they knew that they had unique access to the local culture, to the local way of life that the Europeans depended upon in order to be able to survive in that climate. But they also believed And they basically trained these mixed race children to still be more loyal to European interests than their African mothers. And oftentimes they would do this by, through different religious brainwashing, if you will, oftentimes saying, well, we're the more sophisticated, we're the more loyal, we're the more godly, your mothers, their culture is heathenistic, their culture is lesser than. And so oftentimes the European education, it created this divide in which it taught the children to oftentimes, or told the children to feel more honored and respected and to feel more closely aligned with the European ancestry than their African. And again, that was a way to basically keep them loyal, to try to make sure that they were loyal to their European interest so that they could ultimately use them. And here are just a few examples, right, of these intermarriages. An early one. This is a daughter of a leader who married, I think his name is Franz Boy, in the early 1700s. And what this marriage did between the daughter of an African leader and a European settler was basically the African leader was able to receive monthly payments from, his daughter's marriage. And so again, you had African rulers, you had African men at the time who would oftentimes, they would promise their daughters, they would offer their daughters up to the European settlers as a trade agreement in order to get money, resources, whatever. And these women engaged in these marriages also were able to benefit financially. You had another example. I'm probably butchering her name. I think Achu, but I'm probably butchering her name. But she married 3 different men in exchange for diplomatic ties, right? And so there were 3 different marriages she had with European men. But like I said, obviously, we already know what those marriages meant. It meant economic access, it meant money or whatever. And even though at one point she was accused of adultery, the adultery was ultimately litigated through African means, through African cultural means. And that alliance, I think, was ended. She divorced. But nevertheless, that was a popular example of a woman who married 3 different European men and was able to benefit from the slave trade. There's another one, Annie Sophie Witt. Now, she was a mixed race woman. And they said this example was interesting because something happened with her Danish husband, I think, was arrested. He got into it with the law. And so she actually used her intimate knowledge of the African traditions and, the Danish way of living as a way to kind of wage war or to offer resistance against the Danish when she felt like they mistreated her husband. And so this also offers an example of, while the Europeans oftentimes saw the mixed race or saw the EuroAfricans as being on their side, that's not to say that these people didn't have times where they rebelled against them and started to either lean more heavily into their African roots or offer resistance to the European interests for whatever reason. And another one, you have an example of, this is a wealthy EuroAfrican woman named, I think, Lenny Kuberg. She again married a leader, and while he eventually died, she continued to engage in independent trade at that time. And as I mentioned before, African women were already engaging in independent trade even before the Europeans came over. They existed in a society where they already had the freedom to operate their own businesses, things like that. And so she was operating under that gender role, selling things. And even after her European husband passed, she was still able to basically be a successful slave trader, trade other things. And she lived very wealthy. She lived very wealthy in her particular region. Okay, guys, so real quick, for those of you who are there, like, share, subscribe. Get those likes up. I see 113. Let's see how many I see watching right here. I see 113 watching and I see 89 likes. So get those likes up for sure. And then let's go on a quick break. I want to get those likes up. And then once I get those likes up, then we can go on to the next part. Okay. So like, share, subscribe, guys. Get the likes up. So back to where we're at. Okay. So, we're at the part, right, where, we're going over essentially how the earliest examples of what is now called swirling, divesting, corrective promotion is actually a centuries-long tradition. I gave you guys a few different examples. Those of you guys who are asking for sources can search it out yourself, or if you want to join my Patreon and members only, I'll be happy to do so. But I've given you enough information. If you want specific sources, I am happy to do those. I'm happy to do so for my members. Otherwise, you can easily Google or research some of the sources that I'm providing directly in this. Providing directly in this presentation. So, I gave you a few different examples of people here. And we're talking about, again, these are enterprises and these are ideas that are, like I said, easily Googleable for those of you guys who have any questions about it. But we're just going over the history of how swirling and divesting started as basically like a diplomatic alliance between Africans and Europeans who ultimately at the time were engaging in the trade. And so we're at the point now where we talked about why the byproducts, what would be called exoticals today, right? The light-skinned women who are oftentimes at war with the dark-skinned women or whatever, the so-called exoticals or the Euro-African, and here it's called the mulattrices, I think is what the term is used in Portuguese. These women, again, they became the ideal marriage partners for European settlers because they were seen as insiders who were loyal to European interest and possessed local knowledge. I gave you guys a few examples here: Coco Osso, Achu, Anna Sophie Witt, Leni Kubert. Again, these are just a few. This is not an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination. Not an exhaustive list at all, but they are a few. Also, for those of you guys who missed the video I did earlier this week, I also gave you guys a few examples of Black female slave traders. I want to say I mentioned like 4 or 5. So if you guys missed that, if you guys missed my earlier, or for those of you guys who missed my video I did, I think like Monday or Tuesday, you can go back there and I give you 5 different examples of Black female slave traders. So you guys can go back and check that out. I, talked to you a little bit about where they came from. Some of them were from the African coast. Some of them were in the United States of America. Some of them were primarily stationed in Europe. But again, these are examples of actually women, some of them mixed race, some of them purely African, again, who were leveling up, right? Who are gaining access to one of the booming industries at that time, which just so happened to be slavery, which just so happened to be the selling of African bodies. So I provided 5 examples of those. You guys can check that video that I did earlier this week. I want to say it was like Monday or Tuesday that it premiered. And then today we're going a little bit over the history of where this all started, because I gave you guys like the Black female slave traders, but I wanted to talk to you guys about how this actually started, and then the implications of this, and then how this continued. Because what you guys are going to find is, while this started maybe a few hundred years ago, it's evolved. It's taken on different shapes. It's taken on different form. And we're seeing aspects of that today. And I would argue that because this history has been suppressed or it's just never talked about, this is what kind of gives some ladies or propagandists the freedom to push some of these ideas and narratives, because it's just never been called out. Black men are oftentimes the one who were assumed of being self-hating, or who were assumed of selling out their people. Like, we're very comfortable talking about the ways in which Black men sell out their people, or the way in which Black men have historically not stepped up. But there has not been a history, or there just hasn't been comfort with addressing the ways in which women, Black women, African women in particular, were crucial. Because as I mentioned before, European the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, would not have even been able to succeed without the alliances and without the support of the mediators, which at that time were African women. If African women were not there making sure that their European husbands were able to survive in the tropical climate, if they weren't giving them food, if they weren't giving them water, if they weren't keeping them healthy, doing traditional medicine, if they were not integrating them into their societies, if they were not acting as diplomats, translating, doing different things to help their husbands at that time engage in business in their cultures, the transatlantic slave trade as we know it would not have been able to thrive because these Europeans did not have the ability at the time to actively live in these tropical climates. Like I said, the fort in the coastal region of Ghana, they had this fort where it was like at one time it was called the white man's grave because there was like a 50% there was like a 50% survival rate for a lot of the European men who came over because the climate for them was so it was so volatile. They didn't it was abnormal to them. So they relied upon African women to keep them safe. That's what I'm saying. When we understand how crucial and how essential African women and Black women's role was in basically engaging in the transatlantic slave trade and then ultimately other industries that would ultimately destroy the Black community, then we wouldn't be so quick to display everything on Black men. We would look at things collectively for what they are and understand that it's a lot more nuanced than that. Okay. So real quick, I want to acknowledge these. It says, regardless of Black women, we're still seen as property. Yeah, well, and we're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that because we're not exactly in the position where we're talking about, slavery. Now, when we talk about slavery and obviously the American context, and race at that time has really been, I think, legalized. You're absolutely right. But earlier on, when we're talking about these women engaging in diplomatic ties and marriages with these European men, I don't think we could say that they had no agency. Yes, oftentimes they were connected to their fathers and they were connected to their leaders at that time. But African women had a level of agency in things, like I said, that European women did not have. So when we're talking about, free African women at that time specifically engaging in marriages so that they could gain access to the trade at that time, that's different than now enslaved women in America who didn't really have a choice. So yeah, so I understand what you're saying, but the context is a bit different. Here it says, came doing to show some support for erosion and Black women that have been supporting us as Black men against these adversities in past weeks. Thank you so much. Shout out to you for the 18th letter. I really, really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. I know you've been a loyal supporter for some time now, so thank you. And you've been helpful. You give me a lot of details about things in this space before I was even here. So I really appreciate your support. Here it says, it's crazy how us as Black men are used as scapegoats for disingenuous women who just want to assimilate into the dominant white society. Yes. And that's why I think these conversations are important. As I mentioned before, the purpose of this conversation, it's in no way, shape, or form to undermine those who are really happy or healthy or fulfilling interracial relationships. I think most people don't really have a problem with that. But I wanted to specifically address the propaganda that is oftentimes used with interracial relationships and the way that is used to promote misandry, anti-Black misandry, and also the way in which I think it's used to promote very destructive messages about the Black community that just are completely untrue. So that's the whole purpose of this live. So again, thank you guys. Like, share, subscribe. If you like what's going on, of course, y'all know the drill. You can also show support in Cash App or Venmo Shay Sade. And as always, I will be sure to acknowledge all super chats. So thank you guys so much for those of you who are showing some love and sub. Okay, so let's go on over to I want to move on. Oh, shout out to you. I'm going to make sure I got this real quick from the inspirational. The racial hierarchy. Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. Right now, we're here to just dispel some myths. That's what this is all about. We're here to dispel some myths. And we're also here to dispel this idea that Black women have never had any culpability or have never had any hand in undermining the Black community. that is just completely and totally untrue. So this is a really uncomfortable history. But I think if Black women today knew that the so-called swirling and divesting that they promote as a level up was directly connected to the enslavement of their ancestors, they might be less inclined to talk about it as a level up. Like they might just talk about it more. There might be different framing. Like again, if you knew that the historical applications of swirling and divesting meant the enslavement of like entire groups of people, and ultimately the destruction of like much of the African continent, you wouldn't be so quick to promote all this propaganda about it. You might be a little more humble or just more realistic. Or you might not like look at interracial relationships as like some I don't know, as like some, cure all to your life. You might look at it for what it is and then just look at people honestly. Because I mean, I think the way that these ladies fetishize white men is also very problematic. Quite frankly, it's very problematic. And we've actually seen, I mean, we've seen examples of white men going online and being like, hey, can you not do that? Like, this is kind of weird. Like, we're just men, like, we're just human beings like everybody else. Like, we can do good things, we can do bad things. Like, we're not perfect, And so it's at the point now where you have men of other races who are going online and they're like, this is kind of strange. I'm just a human being, just trying to make it in the world, trying to live an honest life, and don't put all this extra stuff on me. You know what I mean? Yeah, okay. So anyways, let's continue. Okay. Like, share, subscribe, and on the drill. So where are we at now? I know I'm kind of going in and out. I wanted to make sure I got those super chats. Appreciate you guys. Okay. So now we are back to, like, as I mentioned before, what the so-called exotic. I use a term in this particular source. I'm referencing Daughters of the Trade for much of this. The book, The Daughters of the Trade. EuroAfrican women, that sometimes they were called the mulattresses. Again, I think that's a term in Portuguese. In some sources, I want to say it was like, Senegal. I want to say it was. They were called the Signatis or the Signaros or whatever. But basically, these were the byproducts of these interracial marriages, oftentimes the men and the women. And as I said before, these, particularly the women became seen as desirable. They became seen as desirable marriage partners for the European men because they had interest they had European interest, or they had loyalty to European interest, but then they oftentimes possessed local knowledge, right? So now, and I gave you guys a few examples for those of you guys who are just joining now. These are just few examples if you want to Google, if you want to look up, or like I said, much of this can also be found through the book, The Daughters of the Trade. If you guys want the full references, you can join my Patreon or my members only. Okay, here. So EuroAfricans distinguished themselves from Africans by the material access to European goods. So as I mentioned before, what happened is after some time, because you have to remember this Cassare institution, or basically this institution where you had, African women who were engaging in diplomatic ties through European men through marriage. This created basically a separate class of EuroAfricans, of mixed race people. And so there were enough of those people for them to start to have their own separate education. I talked about, the separate education that they were taken care of through this thing called the mulatto chest. This was specifically in the Akan area. This is the coastal region of Ghana. But they were offered a separate education from the local Africans, whatever. And what started to happen is, over time, these mixed race people, these mixed race men and women, they started to distinguish themselves from the Africans. And they oftentimes did this through the material access that they had, right? So the things that the material access they had, such as the homes that they were able to get, the kinds of furniture, the kinds of just goods. But they started to distinguish themselves from the Africans, from the people of their mothers, by their material gain. And this signaled to the rest of society that they were specifically a part of the slave trading class. So what's important to note is that the byproducts of the European men and the African women was a slave trading class. And this slave trading class was primarily mixed race women and men. And the reason this is very important to understand is because this trend, it also continued into the Americas, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But oftentimes, when you look at the small percentage of the Black slave traders, because I want it to be clear that while we're focusing on Black slave traders, they still ultimately were a smaller percentage. But nevertheless, when you look at them, you'll notice that many of them are mixed, and they oftentimes had a European paternal ancestry. They oftentimes had European paternal ancestry, meaning their dad was white, their mom was black. And that's for a very specific reason. So again, these Euro-Africans, these mixed race people, they started distinguishing themselves from the local Africans basically through the money, through the different wealth that they were able to flaunt. Most notably, they would wear keys around their neck. And this signaled that they were property owners, and that they participated in the slave trade, and that they were in close proximity to white men. Okay, so and also it's important to know that some of the local African tribes that they assigned spiritual meanings to keys, but nevertheless, we're talking about these Euro-Africans, these exoticals, these mixed race women who would walk around. These people who walk around. They would make sure that they would distinguish themselves the way that they dressed, oftentimes what they wore, ultimately what they had. And again, this was a way of kind of creating a separate class, a separate slave trading class. And this would also signal to the rest of society that they were not of the enslaved, or that they were not basically capable of being of the enslaved, because they were a whole separate class, right? Now, it's important to note, when these alliances first started early on, oops, sorry guys. When these alliances first started earlier on, race as we know it, it wasn't formalized like the way it is today. It wasn't formalized and institutionalized. It was more, at that time, it was more about class and, proximity at that time to wealth, proximity to Europeans with respect to this particular industry, more so than it was race. And so a lot of times, the earliest marriages between Europeans and Africans or whatever, you could see some of the local Africans still having access to things within the fort, still having basically a level of respect or even a level of agency, even when some of the European industries that were going on at that time, they had access to that. However, as the concept of race really continued and as it developed, then we started to see the Euro-Africans, or some of those who at that time were still benefiting and receiving wealth from the slave trade. You notice how they started to experience more discrimination from the Europeans. So as I mentioned earlier on, earlier on, as these alliances were going on, race it strictly was not developed in the way that it became to be. And so they had a little bit more freedom, and arguably they maybe had a little bit more respect. But as racism became more formalized, as became more legalized globally, that created a little bit of a dilemma, if you will, for the Euro-Africans. And it got to the point to where, although that they were oftentimes able to amass wealth, because as I mentioned, this class of mixed breed, exotical, the slave trading class, because I wanted to be clear that the byproduct of these white men and black women were basically a slave trading class. That's essentially what they were for. This slave trading class, while they were able to amass wealth, and enjoy it to a certain extent within their African regions, they faced restrictions in European societies. So it got to where, like, little things like there was an example of a mixed race man who went to Europe. I think he went to Europe where his father was from. He was shipped there, and he just wasn't able to have, I think, certain jobs, certain educations. Like, he was limited in what he could experience, although he had money. He had the wealth. It wasn't an issue of him being able to afford it, but it was because he had African blood that they did not give him access to those things. And this continued. So I just wanted to talk about that, because you see this not only this continuation, but then you start to see these themes, like, as they grow and as these relationships continue, it starts to create this class, like I said, who become slave traders, but then in a certain extent, they also become a lot more marginalized. So as I mentioned before, as concept of race developed over these centuries, the Euro-Africans faced more discrimination from the Europeans. Despite amassing wealth, they often faced restrictions in the European society. So basically, they weren't fully recognized as being European enough. Although they were educated they were oftentimes educated in a way to be loyal to the European interest. Yet when they went to Europe, or yet when they tried to fully integrate into Europe, they oftentimes faced discrimination because of their part African lineage. This is not uncommon. So and again, I'm referring to, in this particular instance, I'm referring to the Danish. Obviously, we know the slave trade was officially abolished at different times in different countries. But it says the official abolishment of the Danish slave trade in 1803 signaled the decline of the Cassare institution. And again, the Cassare institution, that refers to the interracial marriages that happened in the Akan and the Ga region, the coast of Ghana, the coastal region of Ghana. And it was primarily between Danish settlers who came over and then the local African women at that time. But after it was officially abolished, basically like the interest around slavery shifted. There was no longer really a need for a marriage alliance. And the interracial marriage, that the benefits that it had previously provided European men, it just wasn't as necessary anymore. Partially because it was at that time, made illegal. And then also too, because the slavery interest, it just changed. It became a lot more about agriculture. It became a lot more about, navigating the slaves that were already in the country than it was about trying to necessarily get a whole bunch of new ones. Also too, this is at the point where racism really became a lot more developed, and then imperialism took on its new form. And so it's just ultimately the trade alliances that they initially did to kind of gain access became less necessary as they ultimately wanted to change their strategy. And at this point, now you had European nations. They weren't looking for trade agreements. They were looking for domination. And so at that point, we see the Cassare institution that at one time benefited these African women and their mixed race children. And notice when I say benefited them, I mean, it gave them access to specific wealth, gave them the ability to level up. That institution, which allowed them and their offspring to basically be the intermediators and engage in the slave trade, it just died out. It died out as modern racism and colonialism changed. Their role as intermediaries basically became less necessary. But also, I want you guys to recognize the Cassare institution, the interracial marriages that happened between Europeans and Africans for the purpose of slave trading and engaging in diplomacy, essentially. This is about 150 years, right? And again, I'm referring specifically to this region in Ghana, but it's about 150 years. The timing may change slightly depending upon the coastal region that you're looking at, but it was a 150-year, government sanctioned enterprise, if you will. And really, the only reason it died out was because it just became less necessary, and because European interests shifted. Now, so this is a quick recap. Now we're talking about the Daughters of the Trade again. This is a lot of the references can be found from this book, although some of the ones that I mentioned also you can easily Google. But this reveals that the Daughters of the Trade reveal that the transatlantic trade was an economic, social, and intimate enterprise. The Cassare institution, it allowed African women and their offspring to serve as essential intermediaries in the slave trade. This institution died out with the rise of modern racism and colonialism. So basically, again, what we discovered, we went over a lot of information, but what we basically discovered is that the transatlantic slave trade would not have been able to thrive in any capacity without these interracial marriages. These interracial marriages were absolutely crucial in order for the Europeans to gain access to the African market and trade at that time. If those marriages had not happened, if those alliances had not happened, then much of what we saw, you know what I mean? The transatlantic, we may not even be having this conversation, you know what I mean? Like all the mess that we saw happen over the centuries, it would not have been able to take off because Europeans, they didn't have the European slave traders, they did not have the ability, they didn't have the access, they didn't have the wherewithal to be able to navigate the African climate. They depended upon these marriages early on as the transatlantic slave trade was taking off. They depended upon these marriages and to be able to navigate, the land and to be able to navigate their trade. And then, as I mentioned before, after decades upon decades of those unions happening, they created children who helped instigate the slave trade. We talked about how these mixed race children were given specific education. They were given specific access to trades, to materials, to goods. So a lot of times they were given necklaces that would wear keys around their neck to basically signal that they owned property, to show that they had wealth, to indicate to their societies that they were property owners. So it was a way of distinguishing themselves from those who were basically liable to get caught up in the slave trade. But the thing about it is, as I'm saying before, these interracial marriages were absolutely crucial to the transatlantic slave trade. If those interracial marriages had not happened, I don't think that the transatlantic slave trade would have had the amount of success that they did. And by success, I mean them being able to amass the amount of wealth. It was a gruesome, brutal trade. We know this, but I'm saying the only reason they were able to effectively do it and even gain access to those African bodies was because of the intermediaries. And that's what these particular African women and their fathers, their families who were engaged in it, that's what they did. They helped give access to these European settlers because it gave a lot of times them wealth. It gave them a lot of times material gain. And to this day, there are literally some families to this day in the African continent who are incredibly wealthy, who have, have amazing businesses, and they are, in the millionaire, billionaire class. And if you scratch the surface a little bit, you find out, oh, they were engaged, like their ancestors were engaged in what they would consider they were gutsy businessmen, but they were engaged in the slave trade. So to this day, you have some of the offspring of those people benefiting from those diplomatic ties. But unfortunately, it was at the expense of millions of African people. You know what I mean? So you guys hit the like button. Yeah, I see that. Hit the like button, like, share, subscribe. Y'all know the drill. Okay. And if you guys find this useful, hit the Cash App, Venmo. I'll be sure to acknowledge all Cash Apps and super chats. Y'all know the drill. Okay. So moving on to a few other things, because I wanted to just give you guys a quick backdrop. I did the live, or not live, I did like the premiere earlier this week where I just basically gave you guys a few, I think it was like 4 or 5 examples of Black female slave traders. Again, this is very uncomfortable to talk about. It's not a fun history, but it is history nonetheless. So I gave you guys a few examples earlier this week. You can guys check my video I posted, I think it was like Monday or Tuesday. I gave you specific names and gave you guys just a really brief history of what they did. But I wanted to give you guys a little bit more history and a little bit more context, because that's really important in understanding how that even came to be. So what we just talked about is how the concept of swirling, divesting, corrective promotion, or at basically some point, these were like government sanctioned enterprises where Europeans and Africans entered into a trade. And the trade agreement was interracial marriage. And that is how the slave trade was able to really become profitable. Now what I want to look at specifically is how this translated over to Black America and what this means today. Because my argument is that because, first of all, this history is not really taught, it's not really known. Nevertheless, the impacts are felt today, but I think lack of awareness and the ignorance around it can create room for a lot of propaganda to spread. And that's what I ultimately am trying to dispel. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how this actually, we're going to talk a little bit about how this translates into Black America. And I mentioned, yeah, some of you guys talking about the Arabs. I want to be clear, this is by no means an exhaustive history. I focus specifically on like the in Ghana, the coastal regions of Ghana, but this is by no means a extensive history. I'm just providing a few examples to kind of paint a picture of trends, because while the history is slightly different in different regions, you will see a consistent trend, a consistent model that they were able to use to basically cause this thing to, become successful in the way that it did. Okay. Again, thank you. Like, share, subscribe. I want to make sure I got okay. So now we're going over real briefly into the swirling, divesting, and corrective promotion in Black America. So that's what I want to talk about. That's what I want to talk a little bit about now. Okay, so how did this all translate into Black America? You know, as I mentioned before, there is this idea that anytime you see somebody, anytime you see a woman specifically who's going online and just saying really egregious, like dumb things about Black men, or she's propagandizing interracial relationships, there's this common belief that, oh, she must be an African, quote, tether, unquote, right? I hear this all the time. And as I mentioned before, it is true that the earliest examples of divesting and all that stuff, the earliest examples of that can be seen on the African continent, absolutely. But it didn't stop there. Like we can't pretend like there aren't also like long-term historical examples of this on the American continent, in the Black American culture. And so that's what I want to talk a little bit about today as well, because again, I think it can be really easy to just blame, you know, the worst and all this treacherous Keisha behaviors, I'll put it, on like, quote, African tethers, unquote. It's easy to do that, but I'm like, that's actually just not true. And then I think, see, there's a few problems with that, because the first thing that does is, one, it actually gaslights Black men who have actually experienced this kind of stuff with Black American women, because best believe there are Black men who follow me, some of you guys who are listening to me, who have ran into Black American women who have these beliefs, who have said it, who have done kind of crazy stuff. So it completely gaslights Black Americans out of their own experience when they've ran into this. And then it also, in my opinion, can allow certain ideas, certain beliefs to be able to just be perpetuated without ever being unchecked. Because if we say, oh, this is something that only happens over there, then you're not even aware of it. You're not even like calling it out. You're not even addressing it when you see it happening in your own culture. And that just gives it the ability to just grow and proliferate and multiply without any pushback. And I think that's actually what's happened. So that's why I wanted to talk about the origins of it, but now I want to talk specifically about what this looks like and how this happened, you know, in the Black American context. Okay. So now we're going to go over to the second part. So we'll talk about swirling, divesting, corrective promotion in Black America. So, you know, I kind of already see some of you guys talking about this in the comment section, but it's very clear, you know, white men have had access to Black women since the beginning of the plantation in America. Much of it was forced. And I do want to be very clear. You have to remember, like, when Black people came over, you know, for them, pretty much they came over as the enslaved class. They were not even legally classified as humans. And so were there sexual interactions going on between white men and Black women? Absolutely. I mean, you had people who came over as breeders, and their entire role of the plantation was just to produce a labor force. So this absolutely happened. I do want to make it clear that you know, these things, oh, I'm sorry, was I sharing this? I thought I was sharing this real quick. I do want to make it clear that, like, these things were, because these women were considered enslaved, it's not like they really had a choice. They really didn't have a choice. So it's hard to really engage, okay, how much of it was really, you know, a mutual desire versus how much of it was forced. Like, it's really hard to be able to measure that when we understand that they weren't considered humans. The Africans, Black people at that time, Black women at the time, they were not even seen as like full capable humans that had desires, that had free will, that had thought. They weren't seen as that. And so, yes, the earliest examples, I mentioned a few here. One of the most popular ones, Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. That's probably one of the most popular and romanticized examples of a slave owner who had a long-term relationship with one of his slaves. There's Karina Hinton and Silas Omohundru. I'm probably butchering that. And then another popular one, Patsy and Edwin Epps. This was the story that they kind of used for 12 Years a Slave. These are just like some random popular examples of interracial alliances between, at that time, white slave owners and African women, or at times, mixed race women. And the reason it's important to note, there is a slight difference. There's a slight difference, or I'm gonna say there is a difference between, someone engaging in interaction with someone he deems as his property, someone that, with an individual that doesn't have any rights, with an individual that really can't say no, which is what was happening in the American context. That is different than free African women willingly engaging in marriages with European settlers. So the context is different because one was a freed African woman who consciously engaged in marriage to engage in the slave trade. And then now in the American context, you oftentimes had enslaved African women who weren't seen as humans, who were forced to engage in these sexual interactions with their slave masters. And there's documented history of this, right? Much of it was oftentimes it could be very brutal. These women were experiencing extreme psychological abuse. With that said, though, like I said, much of it was forced. There are, examples. There are some beliefs that some of it was also, there was a mutual desire. And with that, here's some other popular examples of the earliest interracial interactions on the American continent. They called it like the secret balls. They were called fancy maids, octoroon, quadroon balls, right? And so again, these were kind of like popular ideas, but basically oftentimes these were mixed race women. The term was mulatta at the time. These were all, oftentimes a byproduct of a European man, African woman, African slave. These were mixed race women who were offered to white men as like mistresses or concubines. So these mixed race women, they would become kind of like the concubine class. And it was not uncommon for these mixed race women to also have separate experiences than the house slaves. So again, when we talk about, that tension between the dark skin and the light skin, and we see that to this day, where like sometimes the light skin women they're seen as envied from the darker skin women. They're seen as more beautiful. They're seen as more exotic. They're seen as more desirable. There's a long history. Ever since interracial marriage became like a diplomatic alliance, there's a long history of interracial people being treated uniquely or differently than the fully Black people, going all the way back to like, the Signaris and, the Cassares marriages that we talked about just a few minutes ago, and, on the African continent, and how they became the whole separate trading class. And then now in the United States of America, we saw these mixed race people, particularly mixed race women, having a different experience. I mean, to be clear, oftentimes they weren't free. They still, sometimes in these cases, these were enslaved women, but they may have had different experiences. Sometimes they were given better access. They weren't given the same kind of manual labor. Oftentimes some of them were seen as like concubines. They were seen as mistresses. They were seen as like, they use the term fancy maids, but they were seen as like the exotic, desirable type. And so the European men would buy these women, these mixed race women, as their like basically concubines. Okay. So now, and so these examples I talked about, these are all examples that happened during slavery, during the complicated, dark, portion of slavery. This was all going on. And now I want to transition, if we think about after slavery was legally ended, and then, Black folks to get into the Reconstruction era and then into Jim Crow, there's this complicated history of interracial relationships that's continued. As we talked about earlier on on the plantation, these women didn't have a choice. So it's really hard to be able to gauge how many of them enjoyed it when they weren't considered humans. These were slaves who were engaging in interaction with the slave masters, whether they wanted to or not. And like I said, there are memoirs of this. There's documented history of this, and many of them were traumatized and did not engage in it. But with that said, when you have examples, okay, the Reconstruction era and Jim Crow, you still have these interracial relationships continue. So African American sociologist E. Franklin Fraizer, he noted in one of his books that notable Klansmen would have romantic relationships with Black mistresses while engaged in the Klan. Right? So put another way, this is he's one of the most prolific African American sociologists, and he found that there were Klansmen, like open white supremacists, who had Black side pieces, who had Black mistresses. Now, we're past slavery at this point. They're supposed to be at the era where Black people are free. Now, of course, we know there's Jim Crow. There's all kind of there's still a lot of racial terrorism that Black folks are going through. So I'm not going to lie about that. But nevertheless, we're talking about what's going on in the Reconstruction era, what's going on in the Jim Crow, what's going on there. There was still some interracial alliances. Yes, it was common for African American women to be forced on. That was common. But he's talking about mistresses. Mistresses is a lot different than somebody was forced upon you as an African American woman. There's nothing you can really do. That's a little bit different. So he noted that what he found was that these were white Klansmen who had Black mistresses. Okay, let me see. Okay, sorry guys. Let me okay, let me see where we're going. Now, so again, we're talking a little bit about what this has looked like in the Black American context. We talked about, obviously in the plantation, we already know what was going on there. This has been long documented. This is not surprising. You had slave owners and you had African women who were engaging in sexual relationships. Much of it was forced. There's a question of how much of it was mutually desired. There's a question around that. It's really hard to gauge that when we understand that Black women at that time were not considered human. So it's really hard to gauge how much of it was a mutual desire, but nevertheless, we know what happened. We had secret balls, fancy maids. He had octoroon balls, quadroon balls. These were examples of basically just mixed race women who were sold to slave owners at that time to be concubines. Right? Again, we're talking about now. This is the history of interracial relationships in America. Now, we're talking about Reconstruction era Jim Crow. We have African American sociologists who noted that he noticed Klansmen. These are racist Klansmen who engaged in romantic relationships with Black mistresses. Now, here I mentioned the Pulaski riot. This is a dispute that rose between a Black store owner, Calvin Carter, and a white store owner, Calvin LeBerth owner. This dispute, it actually ended up creating a race riot. But what happened was the white store owner, LeBerth, he attacked the Black store owner after rumors were made that he and his friends threatened his Black mistress. So basically, the way that you guys can look this up, the Pulaski riot, basically what happened was the white store owner had a Black mistress. Apparently, there was a Black store owner that for some reason, we don't know why, but for some reason, him and his friends threatened the Black mistress of this white Klansman. So when this white Klansman found out that his Black mistress was threatened, he went and, he basically, he attacked the Black store owner. So that's called the Pulaski riot. You can Google this right now and look it up. Like I said, I'm just providing you guys examples. And again, these are by no means, this is not an exhaustive list. These are just examples, and these are some trends that some of y'all can search out. You said, I remember this. Okay, yeah, so you're familiar with this. Yeah. Here it says, my thanks for your efforts, even if I'm an you said an apostate. I don't know what you mean, but thank you. Thank you for the 5. I appreciate it. Yeah, never going over a lot of history, but again, yeah, I think it's important to get this information out there, just to have it out there. I mean, you may or may not listen to it. You may or may not agree. I mean, I'm providing the facts, and then y'all can do with it what you want. But I do appreciate their support. But again, so I wanted to show you guys this example. going back to the Black American context. So now we're just talking specifically about Reconstruction era, Jim Crow. Again, this is this is a decades long period of Black American history, but just kind of giving you a sense of what was going on here. And we have African American sociologist E. Franklin Fraizer. He noted that, again, notable Klansmen had romantic relationships with Black mistresses while engaged in the Klan. And I mentioned the Pulaski riot, which again was started by a white Klansman who had a Black mistress. This Black mistress was threatened by a Black man and his friends for whatever reason. And the white Klansman, in protection of his Black mistress, went in. He basically incited a race war against the black men. So y'all can look up the Pulaski riot if you're not familiar with it. So now I want to turn your attention to some Black American female thought leaders. Again, this is not an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination. This is not a full, thorough list. But, this idea that swirling and divesting or corrective promotion is only something that Black tethers do, that only Africans do, that only Nigerians or whatever. Unfortunately, it's not really consistent with Black American history. Because as I just showed you, this is a Black American, one of the most popular Black American sociologists telling you that he noted sexual interactions between the Klansmen and Black American women. See, some of these Klansmen had mistresses. Some of y'all saw this today. I mean, we've literally seen examples of this today in modern era. We've seen examples of this today, like people who are openly promoting white supremacy, and then you find out they have like mixed kids into Black wife, and you're like, wow, that was a plot twist I was not expecting. So he noticed this trend back in his era. I gave you just one example, the Pulaski riot. Now, here are some, these are well-respected, prominent Black female thought leaders, just celebrities. Some of them are deeply involved in civil rights movement, in Black liberation. And again, I'm not here to hate on them because all of them are respected. All these people are respected from Black men and Black women by and large. We have Dorothy Dandridge, widely respected. We have Lena Horne. You got Maya Angelou, Nina Simone, Eartha Kitt. Like these are well-loved Black female thought leaders, particularly among Black feminists and Black men. Note the amount of white partners. Note how many of them have white partners, white husbands. And as I mentioned before, this is not an exhaustive list. This is by no means an exhaustive list. Note how many of them have Black husbands, not Black husbands, have white husbands. These are Black female thought leaders engaged in civil rights, engaged in Black liberation, engaged in. Note how many of them have white husbands. That's all I'm saying. So can we really say that swirling and divesting, that this is a new phenomenon, that Black American women have always been loyal, that they've never, ever, there's never been a history of them consistently engaging in interracial interactions, whether it be forced or whether it be consensual? I don't think we can really say that. Okay, here are some earlier media examples. I'm pulling stuff from Jet Magazine. You know what I mean? This is the two at the bottom. That's Dorothy Dandridge. She's like early Hollywood. Examples of her, and these are different films where she's in interracial marriages, and let's also be clear, she did have she had multiple interactions, multiple relationships with white men. And by and large, let it be clear too, some of these ladies were involved in interracial relationships before Loving versus Virginia. Like, to my understanding, Lena Horne and Dorothy Dandridge, I'm like, that was before Loving versus Virginia. I got to do the exact dates, but to my understanding, that was before Loving versus Virginia. So, but like I said, here are some earlier media examples. We're looking at Jet Magazine. I remember Jet Magazine as a little girl, seeing that stuff on the kitchen counter, on the different tables, magazine tables. And again, this is by no means an exhaustive list. This is not an exhaustive list at all. Okay. Now let's look at some more recent media examples. These are just movies and sitcoms. Movies and sitcoms. We got Whoopi Goldberg, we got Nia Long, we got Holly Berry. You know what I mean? Gabrielle Union. These are Black American women. And this is, like I said, this is not an exhaustive list. I'm just showing you guys some media examples. That's all. I'm showing you media examples of interracial interactions. And so, and if we look at today, within the last 3 months, let's just look within the last 3 months. These are stories that recently went viral. Obviously, Nicolandria, that's, you know, a big social media craze right now, big off of TikTok, social media, whatever, from Love Island. We had Venus and Serena Williams, who recently went viral, and they went viral primarily because Venus Williams married a European man. But these are Black American women. Alandria thinks she's initially from Alabama. Serena and Venus are from Compton. These are Black American women. Black American women. So when you have ladies come online and have the nerve to sit here and tell you that swirling and divesting is some new movement that Black women have been undyingly loyal at their own expense, and they've finally gotten the gall and they've finally gotten the gumption and the courage to leave the Black male plantation and level up their lives by getting with white men, and that this is some new phenomenon that's only happened for about the last 10-15 years. They're lying. They're just blatantly lying to you. They're lying, or they're completely unaware. At best, they're just completely unaware and don't know history. At worst, they're just actively lying. But I just sat there and gave you an entire history going back like 400 years of swirling and divesting. And the most dangerous thing about it is to correlate or to connect interracial marriage to level up culture is actually what put Black people into slavery. I don't know how else to put it. As I mentioned before, the transatlantic slave trade would not have been possible and would not have been as profitable if it was not for the intermediaries. And those intermediaries were mixed race children. And those mixed race children, the slave trading class, came from interracial marriages. If those interracial marriages had not happened, then the transatlantic slave trade would not have been able to profit the way that it did, because the European settlers at that time who wanted to engage in the trade of African bodies, they literally did not have the capacity to exist in the African continent, to navigate the African continent, to be able to even trap the Africans. They could not navigate the terrain. They could barely handle the climate. They didn't understand the culture. They didn't understand the language. They didn't understand how to survive in that kind of heat. And so they depended upon African knowledge, local African knowledge, to be able to even gain access to that trade. And that happened through collaboration. So the earliest examples of leveling up, the corrective promotion, where you had government sanctioned corrective promotion through interracial marriage, literally ended in the enslavement of millions of Black folks. That's what it produced. That's what it produced. So this is what I'm saying. Like, when you just see people like go around and they promote these ideas, they're actually very dangerous to me and just kind of dumb, because I'm like, bro, you don't know history. And it hasn't really turned out too well. Like, if we just look at history, Black women using interracial marriage, or using white men specifically, Black women using white men specifically as a level up, has not ended well. It literally led to the enslavement of Black folks and the decimation of like multiple African countries. Like, it can that completely destroyed so many African societies in the long term. Now, what it did do is it gave specific African women and their offspring, it did give them certain material benefits. And that's the thing about it. Some people were so willing to do it because they got the material benefits. I mean, in the example I shared earlier this week, you had African woman who came over to the state. She came over to the United States and she toured African plantation. Like, she toured plantations in America. Like, she went around and toured plantations. She was considered a freed African woman because she was engaged in the slave trade. But she came over to the United States of America and she toured the antebellum South, these plantations. So, like, certain women, because they were able to gain wealth, they didn't really care. It didn't really matter to them. And like I said, to this day, the descendants of some of those people actually have material wealth. Like they're very wealthy. If you scratch the surface a little bit and see where their wealth came from in their family, their intergenerational wealth, you'll see that it's connected to, the slave trade. So for them personally, it benefited and financially, but it came at the expense of their community. And as I mentioned before, a lot of their children now were kind of put in precarious situations. They were in their own separate class. Some of the mixed race children, as I mentioned before, they were able to amass wealth, but then when they went and tried to integrate into Europe, when they went and tried to integrate into white societies, they were not seen as the same. They faced discrimination. And even in America, we talked about the octoroon balls, we talked about the quadroon balls. Sometimes they were called fancy maids. These are mixed race women specifically who were seen as oftentimes they were like a concubine class, and so they may have had slightly more access to the benefits of that time, the material wealth of that time, but they still were never fully recognized. They were never on the same level of white women. They were at best like a mistress class. So this isn't really fun to talk about. It's not popular. This isn't gonna be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get, this isn't a thing that people raise GoFundMe's for, or send a whole bunch of different money. That's like, yeah, it's not. These are not one of these topics that have people wanting to open up their pocketbook and support you. Women don't want to hear this. There's even Black men out here who don't necessarily want to hear this. This isn't a popular, fun thing to say. But if you don't talk about it, then people get to go online and just lie and just say stuff that don't make no sense. And they just get to go online and just lie and just make up stuff. And that's what's been going on. And as I mentioned before, I think partially the reason why there's been such propaganda that's been able to grow the way that it has is because there isn't an understanding of history. There isn't an understanding of what these political alliances actually meant. And they weren't really anything good for Black folks collectively. They weren't. Now, I'm not saying that, like I said before, I'm not here to necessarily tear down or bash those who are in happy, fulfilling interracial relationships. I see nothing wrong with that. But I think we have to be honest about what that actually meant as far as a political strategy. That was not an effective political strategy. That completely destroyed Black communities. And to this day, you have many who are still trying to get their bearings, quite frankly. And African women were key in that. Yeah, there were African men who collaborated. They allowed it. You had African leaders who they actually promised their daughters, allowed their daughters. They were fully engaged in it because they were getting dowries. They were getting benefits from their daughters engaging in these marriages. But these African women themselves, free African women, by the way, also were benefiting from these alliances. But they didn't produce anything good. Shout out to you, Drake. It says you're describing Meghan Markle and Rhonda Rousey. That actually might be, that would actually be, because that's probably more would be the closest modern day example, right? You have Meghan Markle, who she married. I mean, I think he's now, I don't even think he's considered a prince now. I think they removed the royal lineage. But at the time she married, the prince. And it was a huge thing. And notice how Meghan Markle, she became every woman out there was claiming her as Black as soon as she married a European prince, right? So she's considered, a Black woman marrying to European royalty, and everyone's all excited. Well, I'm gonna say everyone. A lot of Black women are thrilled, excited. But y'all notice how she was treated. Y'all notice how the European media, they were not kind to Miss Meghan Markle. They were not kind to Miss Meghan Markle. They were not kind to her at all. They were saying very racist things about their children. She was not ever really fully accepted the way a white woman would have been of royal lineage. She was not accepted. Okay. So I think that is a really good prime example. And by the way, y'all got to remember how the British Commonwealth got their money. That old saying, the sun never sets on Britain, that didn't come through peace. That was brutal warfare that happened globally. That didn't come through peace. So she married into a wealthy family that had a long history of not only enslavement, but oppressing African nations. But a lot of women were loving it just because of the optics, because she got access to the wealth, the class, how it looked, it's pretty, oh, lights, camera, action. But the implications were like, they just won't really think, they didn't really care about that. They cared about the status. And that's what I'm saying. I do think to a certain extent, what we have to recognize is that there are just someone out there who they just care more about money and status. That's all they care about. They care about money and status. They do not care if them getting money and status means that their entire community is burned to the ground, to hell. They don't care. As long as they benefit, as long as they and their offspring benefit, that's all they care about. And because of that mindset, that's what actually, I would argue to a certain extent allowed the slave trade to benefit to continue the way that it did. And that mindset continues today to a certain extent. Here it says, finally caught up, enjoying the analysis. I'll reach out about feeling in a few days. Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much for the super chat. I really, really appreciate it. I know we went over a lot of information. I know this is maybe not the most exciting kinds of topics. They're not the most exciting, and they're not always the most well received. I'll say that much. But it's history. History is not kind to anybody. History is just history. Here it says, I found out how dire this was when I moved south. I'm curious what you mean about when you move south. When you say dire, you mean just as far as like, you think women who are kind of caught up in like and again, the propagandized idea of interracial relationships or swirling, let me know. Because like I said, there are some who are in healthy relationships that are not really into the propaganda stuff. I believe that does exist, but I think just a lot of what's promoted online is it's more propaganda than it is just like genuine love. Yeah, I think I got that one. I want to make sure I got everyone. Yeah. So, I'm not as familiar with Ronda Rousey. So we went over a lot. Game changer, I might have to catch you next time. I went over a lot. I had a goal. I didn't reach it, which is fine. But I said if I didn't reach my goal, I was going to get off and then go to the gym early. So I feel like I gave a lot of information. I feel like I gave you guys a lot of stuff. As just a quick recap, for those of you guys who are just not joining, you guys can go catch the replay. We went over a ton of information. I gave you some sources. If you want the full sources, you can join my channel membership or my Patreon. But really what I just wanted to explain to you guys was that swirling, divesting, as they've called it today, corrective promotion, is a centuries-long tradition. It did begin in the African continent, absolutely. I gave you some examples, or the earliest examples of that can be seen on the African continent. I went over countless examples. You can catch the replay. We've seen examples of it, obviously, in Black America too, and I think it's important to recognize that, because I think when you have some Black Americans who are really uncomfortable with the concept of Black American women also engaging in traitorous behavior, if you will, that allows these beliefs and these mindsets to just grow without ever being challenged, and then also gaslights Black people, Black men and Black women who have run into this out of their own experience. And that I think is very dangerous. So as I mentioned before, I'm not going to say that this is every Black woman. This is not every Black woman. Not all African societies were engaged in the slave trade. Not all of them were in support of it. Not every Black woman obviously has had a history of doing traitorous things. So that goes without saying. But, all it really takes is a small handful sometimes to really, pack a punch, or to really create a lot of damage. And as we see, the implications of interracial alliances or interracial alliances through interracial marriage historically were actually very detrimental. They're very detrimental because of what they turned into. So that's why when I see women, like when I see them use proximity to white men as like a social strategy to improve themselves, to level up, to improve their ranking, I'm like, oh, you're just practicing a centuries-long tradition at this point. You're just doing what a lot of women do. You may actually be the descendant of women who did that previously. And some of those women benefited. But as I mentioned before, it was oftentimes at the expense of their own community. And I think that needs to be clearly articulated. So anyways, I think that's what have I have on this topic. I also want to say this is why when you see some of you guys mentioned Kenyans, some of you guys mentioned Nigerians, some of you guys mentioned just women from the African continent. When you see them engaging in some swirling stuff, we understand there's a history there. When you see Black American women engaging in some swirling stuff, you understand there's a history there. This is something that's happened all across the diaspora. And again, I'm not saying this is all Black women, but I think I just don't think because we haven't really talked to it a ton or talked about it a ton, then that's why I think Black women have just honestly been able to get away with it. Those who are trying to. And I also think that's why, like I said, they got these ideas out there that are just crazy. It sounds some crazy stuff, right? And what's crazy to me too is how, I think the way in which Black men have catching like the flack or been blamed as like the biggest sellouts to me is crazy when we just even if we just look at a few of the examples. Like I gave y'all just a few, like this is not even an exhaustive list, but they say that Black men are some snow bunny chasers. They're the biggest, always chasing white stuff. And I'm like, I mean, you freaking got examples of Black women falling in love with neo-Nazis. Black women falling in love with slave owners. You got movies of this being romanticized. Black women falling in love with European men who engaged in slavery and actually going and helping their European husbands managing the slaves. Like there are historical examples of this. Like there are movies, there are sitcoms that were created because of this. Like Black servants falling in love with their slave men. Like, and I mentioned, some of the earliest Black female thought leaders, liberator leaders had white husbands. And I'm not saying like it's not that necessarily inherently has to be bad in and of itself, but it's like, what's the narrative behind it? And then how many of these ladies were doing this because they were just engaging in some traitorous behavior? As I mentioned before, you got a Black American sociologist, E. Franklin Fraizer, one of the most popular ones, talking about Black women being involved with men from the Klan. This is after slavery, by the way. This is after the part this is after Black folks were supposedly free. Okay. So what's I'm saying, like, we ain't got to lie about this stuff. We ain't got to lie about this stuff. The redemption of Ham, as I mentioned, this is not an exhaustive list. I didn't even mention the redemption of Ham because I wanted to take that came out of Brazil. I wanted to focus specifically, not even on the Americas. I wanted to focus specifically on Black America, which some of y'all call FBA, ADOS, but I was like, no, let's focus specifically on what's happened in the continental US. So we can't, because I gave y'all examples of things that happened in Black America. I gave y'all examples of celebrities, of thought leaders, of people today that are widely respected among Black American men and women. I gave you examples of things, of situations, of people in Black America. So that's why I didn't mention the redemption of Ham, because obviously this behavior has happened all across the diaspora, or it's impacted the Americas, the Caribbean, whatever. But I'm just saying specifically for those who want to believe for whatever reason that Black American women don't have the capacity to engage or haven't ever engaged in this. I'm like, okay, we don't have to lie about this. We don't have to. So anyways, I gave you guys a ton of information. So hopefully this was helpful. Be sure to like, share, subscribe on the way out. I'm trying to think. I think I got everything I wanted to cover off. For those of you guys who are catching the replay game, no problem. If you have any questions, let me know down in the comment section. Members, I might do a follow-up with the members of the Patreon. If you guys have anything specific you guys would want me to cover off, or any specific questions, maybe we can do like a members only live or whatever. And yeah, like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you're notified each time I go live. Go back and catch the replay, go catch the sources. If for those of you guys who want to double check, because you should double check everything. I don't pretend to be, you shouldn't just believe anybody because they say it. You can go check the sources, you can check the names, you can do all of that. Daughters of the Trade, I got a lot of the information from Daughters of the Trade. You can also go back and what I did earlier this week, where I gave you guys at least 5 examples of Black female slave traders. And as I mentioned before, it's also important to note that while while the percentage of Black people in America who owned slaves, it was a very, 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 very small percentage. I don't want folks to just think that Black people are out here just making money. No, it was a small, 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 small minority. It's important to note that the majority of them were mixed race women specifically. Majority of them were the byproducts of European men and African women who created mixed race children. And then oftentimes those mixed race children, they might inherit some of the slaves or some of the basically, some of the assets from their European father once they passed away. And so this is why oftentimes you would have Black slave traders. These Black slave traders were oftentimes women, specifically mixed race women. Also, too, total side note, you did have times where Black people would literally purchase their family. So they would like purchase them as slaves so that they could be free. That happened too. But anyways, so that's what I have. Like, share, subscribe. Thank you guys so much for those of you guys who joined me. Thank you for bearing with me. I was a little later than I wanted to be, but I had a lot of information I was compiling, as you can see. And I just wanted to make sure I had my sources. So if you guys have any questions, you can leave it down in the comments. Email me, members. I'll follow up with you guys in a bit and see if you guys have anything specific you would like to cover off, or maybe we can do members only live. So thank you guys for hanging out. Thank you guys. If you found this helpful, as always, pass this along. You can hype this video. Also, be sure to shop my collection. It's not Jermaine's fault. I'm working on my shirt right now. You can find this in sweatshirt. I have this in a sweatshirt. I also have this in a different design, in a sweatshirt, in a t-shirt, and in a cap. It's not Jermaine's fault. You can catch the book, because this is all based upon a kid's book that we're working on. Well, actually working on, that I have. This is a series we're working on. And that's what I got. So you guys support your favorite content creators. You can show love Cash App, Venmo. If this really spoke to you, you can, show some love on Cash App, Venmo, or you can become a channel member and, support me so you can get access to exclusive content. And thank you guys for hanging out with me. Okay. Thanks for listening to me babble for almost 2 hours. This was almost 2 hours worth of information. And we're going to talk later. Okay, guys? Bye.
Yeah, step into my live stream. Welcome to the show. I'm crispy the catfish and high value glow. I preach level up and girl get paid, but behind the scenes I'm crying in the shade. I drag exoticals to pretty girls online. Say they're overrated, overhyped and declined, but the truth of it all, the secret I hide. I wish I had their face, their waist, their light skin pride. I call it colorism, screaming day and night, but envy hits different when the girl is your fight. I'm preaching from a throne built out of spite, a queen of the dark, but not in the way I like. Cause I'm crispy, the colorism catfish, prophet of the past, over granting no wish, leader of the lonely with a bitter big background, teaching hypergamy while I'm breaking down. I want exotical baby, the rich white king, but white men scroll past me like I'm not a thing. Can't birth the aesthetic I envy the most, so I haunt the internet like a jealous ghost. I tell girls, sis, get you a high value man, but the men that I want got me blocked on the gram. I dream of blonde babies, blue eyes so sweet, but rich white dudes won't even meet. I fantasize daily about marry up, but I'm DoorDash broke with an empty cup. I roast pretty women cause I can't compete, so I built an empire from my personal defeat. I say it's society, I say it's their shade, but truth is I'm mad I can't change my fate. It's not just my shade, it's my size, my mess. I'm preaching from a life I don't ever possess. Yeah, I'm crispy, the colorism catfish, prophet of the past. Oh, I talk, they dismiss, leader of the lonely in a world so cold, selling fantasies I can't even hold. I want exotical babies with a rich white king, but those men ain't checking for a dark white queen. I post high value dreams, but my truth is raw. I'm the mentor of the miserable, broken with a flaw. They call me bitter, but bitterness is just grief in stilettos. Pretty girls walk in light, I walk in comments. High value men walk past me like I'm invisible air. So I built a platform, a sisterhood of the overlooked, a congregation of the unwanted. I'm not just crispy, I'm the prophet of the past over. I'm crispy, the colorism catfish, jealous of the beauty that I always dismiss. Leader of the lonely, my kingdom of pain, preaching that bugger I'll never attain. I want exotical kids with a rich white man, but I'm shadow banned from every dating app plan. So I log back online, I'm queen of the lost, a big bag boss, forever at a cost. Forever at a cost.
Black girl, white guy, black girl, white guy, black girl, white guy, yeah. Black girl, white guy, black girl, white guy, black girl, white guy, yeah. Let's go.
Black girl, white guy, swirling like a milkshake, cookies on the side, yeah, yeah. Black girl, white guy, swirling like a milkshake, cookies on the side, yeah, yeah. Black girl, white guy, swirling like a milkshake, cookies on the side, yeah, yeah. Black girl, white guy, swirling like a milkshake, cookies on the side.
Let me paint a picture for you. Heard he got that good, got that intermission for you. Ain't about his mama business, always getting in it for you. And he got a soft spot, won't be like that with his daughter. He don't like him but the bear, baby want a custom order. Met him at the Five Guys, seen him eating fries. I was in my car, he seen my knees, I seen his eyes. Then we had a couple drinks, we was vibing, then we went inside. And I told him I was finna cut him off, but then I lied. Cause he see me and he know I'm outside. He wanna get in and wanna go for a ride. When he finish, need a bowl of rice on the side. He got the tools, know I keep him in the toolbox. White boy turned into a poodle, call him Rufus. With the crew neck, and he know I'm too fly. Had to show him what it do, we gon' see what it's gon' do. God. Black girl, white guy, black girl, white guy, black girl, white guy, yeah.